Hello, and welcome to another episode of Women's Empower Active, an initiative from UR Sportswear, where we interview women doing amazing things all across the country and actually all across the world to help inspire us everywhere to live active, healthy, and happy lifestyles. I'm Amy Moritz. I'll be your moderator today, and today we're so lucky to have, so very excited to have Heather Anderson with us. Heather, just on September 24th, completed a self-supported Thru-hike of the Appalachian Trail from Maine to Georgia, setting the record for the fastest solo journey along the 2,180 miles. It took her 54 days, 7 hours, and 48 minutes. And she is here with us today. So hello, Heather. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Now, when you did this hike, you didn't really tell anybody about it. You didn't, as far as I read, you didn't really get any sponsors. You really didn't tell people that you met on the trail, but you were the goal that you had. You really wanted to fly under the radar. So people just saw, you were like a girl, a backpack, and her sundress out there on the trail. As far as someone with this really ambitious goal, why was it important for you to approach it that way and to fly under the radar and kind of be anonymous about this goal that you had set for yourself?
Well, it wasn't completely anonymous. I mean, I made a public announcement on my Facebook page and on the Fastest Known Times Pro Boards page, and I did post updates there while I was out hiking, but mostly I just wanted to just do my own thing, and I don't know, I didn't see the need to like make a big deal about it, so I did what was necessary to kind of legitimize the record, and that's all. So I was just out there hiking because I like to hike. So.
And I know that you also have done the Pacific Crest Trail. What was your motivation to go out to try to do this goal and to do the hike as fast as you did it?
Which one? Or on both of them, or?
Both. I guess both of them. Or once you do one, is it just that because you did PC and now you want to do Appalachian and see how fast you can do that one?
Yeah. When I did the Pacific Crest Trail, I had no idea if I could do it at all. Like, I had never done anything even remotely similar. I mean, I had thru-hiked, but definitely not doing 40 miles a day. So that was just more of I don't even know if I can do this, but I'm going to go out and try and see what happens. And so, I mean, I had the knowledge that I had that capability, but I wanted to do the Appalachian Trail again. I'd done it in 2003, and I had wanted to do it again for a long time. So I figured, well, I would try to do it again fast. And also, I kind of needed to see for myself if this wasn't just like a fluke that I set the record on the PCT, because there was this little voice in my head that kind of told me that it was, and that I couldn't, repeat that, and so I went out to see if I could indeed repeat it.
So, and what was the year again that you set the PCT trail record?
2013.
2013. So you said that, and I think that a lot of us can kind of like relate to that. I mean, we'll sit out here and say how amazing that was, an accomplishment, and there's that little voice in your head that said like, oh, maybe this is a fluke. That little bit of kind of a self-doubt, and that's something I think a lot of us can relate to.
Yeah. I mean, I've struggled with self-doubt pretty much my entire life, and so people I think would think, oh, well, once you've done this big epic thing, obviously that should take care of self-doubt forever, right? And it doesn't. It's always that insidious little voice that is in the back of your head. And so instead of saying like I was incapable, then it was just saying, well, that was just an accident, or you couldn't do that again, or still giving me reason to think that maybe it was a fluke or something like that. So yeah, it's kind of this crazy thing that no matter what, there's always going to be that little voice in your head that can pretend that or try to tell you that you don't have the self-worth that you think.
Yeah, and you did these great big epic hikes, and you've done them, and you've done them quickly. But the start of your story, this hasn't always been your life for you. As I read in one account, you get back to freshman year in college. right? And is that when you were at the Grand Canyon and kind of, did your first hike, and as I read, you were maybe overweight, and this helped you, as I guess, describe it for us. How this helped you, and what that part meant for you as far as your transformation.
Yeah, so my entire life I had been pretty inactive and overweight, and uh, I read a lot, and I would always read about adventures, like adventure books, because I always just wanted to go on an adventure. Like I grew up in the Midwest, and there was definitely not much adventure there to be had. And so when I was in my freshman year of college, I had the opportunity to get a summer job working at the Grand Canyon. And so I was like, that sounds like an adventure. I will go. And my parents were like, what are you thinking? And I'm like, oh, it'll be fun. So I went. And I think probably like the second day I was there, some of my coworkers invited me to go for a hike. And I'd never been hiking really. And I was like, okay, sounds fun. But I was in poor physical condition and jet lagged. And also you're at elevation there. You're at 5,000 feet. So, I mean, I come from the Midwest to 5,000 feet. And so I wasn't doing well, and I don't even remember, but I probably didn't have food, and I probably had like 20 ounces of water or something with me. Like, I was not really prepared for hiking because just didn't know. And I ended up doing the round trip hike, and it was probably like 8 miles or something like that. And I remember when we left the Indian Gardens, it was 120 degrees. Like, they have a big thermostat, and it says, if it's above this temperature, do not proceed. And the rangers stopped us, and we're like, we have to be at like our orientation training, so we have to go. And he's like, okay, I won't stop you, but it's a bad idea. And so it was like, I don't know, I had several moments on the trip back up to the canyon rim where I thought I was going to die because of all these factors. But there was just something about the experience it was just so different than anything I had ever done before. And there was something about it that just clicked. It was like suddenly this was like that adventure that I'd always been seeking. And so I went out hiking pretty much every spare minute I had that summer. And I hiked like 75 miles that summer, and I was like so stoked because that was so much, and in retrospect it's kind of funny, but at the time I was like, that was like an earth-shattering amount for somebody who like hadn't even really like been hiking before. So yeah, it was a big change. It was a monumental change because I came back from that to school and I decided while I was still at the Grand Canyon that I was going to through hike the Appalachian Trail for the first time after I graduated college. So yeah, it just kind of shifted my focus.
So you have that, that experience, and it shifts your focus, and you find that's something that you just absolutely kind of fall in love with, and you go back to school. And what did you do to keep feeding that? Because I think that it can be you can go out and have this great adventure, and you want to bring it back with you, but you maybe sometimes don't have that follow through. So what steps were you able to do when you went back to school to keep that momentum going?
So when I got back to school, I checked out a bunch of books from the library about the Appalachian Trail, and because this was back before the internet was really like the source, so we still used books. And I remember just like reading pretty much everything I could find about the Appalachian Trail, and kind of just researching hiking and stuff like that, but specifically hiking the AT. And I started jogging. I took up running and weightlifting to try and get myself physically ready. And I mean, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just guessing. And I was just like, well, I'm going to go out and try to run and see how far I can run in like a certain period of time or until I feel like I'm going to die. And so, yeah, I just started trying to get myself physically ready and then tried to do some research. And I think I asked for all kinds of backpacking gear for Christmas. Although, I got stuff that was like off of eBay or from Walmart, like very not like what you would use as a through hiker now, I guess. But just whatever. I just started amassing the knowledge and the skills that way, and that kept me motivated for to get me through. I guess the following summer, I went on a short backpacking trip on my own that kind of was a disaster. Um, but that I didn't really have any other like hikes or things like that in between. It was more just like getting myself physically ready and learning what I was going to need to do for for the AT, and that was enough, I guess, motivation.
We have a question came through on Twitter from Elizabeth, who asked, how did you get started in these endeavors? Did you start small? And you mentioned that, 75 miles over the summer at the Grand Canyon, your first summer, was quite an accomplishment, for you. So you did some of those small hikes, but then you went right into doing the AT, right?
Yeah. So when I started the AT, I mean, I really had no idea what I was doing, and I learned everything out there, or not everything, but I learned on the go. So yeah, I don't really ever, with anything in life, take baby steps. I took up running, and my first race was a 50K. So, I've still never run a marathon. I have no idea what my marathon time is. Don't ask, because I have no idea, because I never run a marathon and stopped. Yeah, so I didn't really ease into the hiking thing. I pretty much did some short stuff at the Grand Canyon, and that was where I fell in love with it, and then did the AT.
And what was it about the AT that really kind of called to you, that you said, this is what I want to do when I graduate from college?
I was just fascinated by the idea that you could walk from Georgia to Maine, like that there was a trail that long. Like that just was mind-boggling to me, and it just sounded like a grand adventure. It all came back to like just having an adventure, and it just seemed like this very, unusual thing, like that you could walk that far, and that it would be fascinating and adventurous. And I mean, I was scared of bears in the dark and snakes and all kinds of stuff, but I was like, I'm going to go anyway because it should be a great adventure, And so, yeah, that was just really what called to me. And having done some hiking, at the Grand Canyon, like I knew that I enjoyed hiking. I knew I enjoyed walking and being out in the woods or in the wilderness. There aren't very many woods at the Grand Canyon, but you know what I mean. And so, yeah, so that gave me that sense that I figured I would probably enjoy the AT, but I really had never gone on like a long backpacking trip, so I didn't really know if I was going to like it long term, but turns out I did. So.
And you liked it enough to go back, several years later. You mentioned that, when hiking the Grand Canyon, when you were there for that summer, that something just clicked for you. When you went back, what was maybe some of the transformation that you went through, or the transition you went through, maybe mentally or emotionally, to take your love of reading about adventures into diving into your own adventure? Were there shifts that happened for you, maybe even subtly over time, that to go from reading about them to getting into them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that life is, process. You're always learning and changing and growing. At least I try to be. And I mean, the things that I do now, I never would have imagined, when I was on the AT the first time. So I mean, I've obviously grown and changed and transformed through my experiences. And I think that my experience at the Grand Canyon, getting me like so hooked on hiking and realizing that I wanted to go do the Appalachian Trail, gave me the desire, I guess, to make changes in my life, as far as like what I ate and exercise, and making that more of a priority, because it hadn't been a priority in my life before, because there was no reason. Like, it didn't matter whether I sat on the couch and ate Oreo cookies, if that was, I never did anything physical, it didn't matter. And so it was rough starting out, because I came back from the Grand Canyon and I couldn't even run around like the track, without being winded, so that's only a quarter of a mile. And by the time I left for the AT, like a year and a half later, I was running 8 miles easily. I mean, jogging, not very fast, but it would have taken, without that motivation to do the AT, to go on my own adventure and not just read about it, there's no way I could have gone from, that barely able to do a quarter of a mile to doing 8 miles, in that short of a period of time. So yeah, there was some sort of mental shift that took place that just gave me the determination, or maybe I had the determination, and that just unlocked it to make changes.
Another question that came in from Twitter, and it was, did you always do this by yourself? Did you have people join you for parts of it? I guess there's, the first time in 2003, right, is when you did the AT the first time.
Yeah.
I guess, have you always been solo as you've gone through these, or have people joined you for parts of them?
So when I did the AT in 2003, I was solo, and then I had a hiking partner when I did the Pacific Crest Trail and the Continental Divide Trails in 2005 and 2006. But then my last two through hikes of the PCT and the AT have also both been solo.
And for you, what's the difference? I mean, is there one that you prefer, or are they just different experiences when you're hiking with someone versus when you're solo?
They're very different experiences, and so it kind of just depends on what you want to get out of things. I'm very comfortable and very happy by myself, and I think I prefer hiking by myself. But I also like to hike with other people too sometimes. So it just kind of depends. Doing a long distance trail for months on end with one single person has its own set of challenges, just because you're spending a lot of time with one person, and not getting a lot of a break. But I think most people that set out to hike a long distance trail solo, they end up hiking with various people off and on. And so they'll hike with somebody for a while, and then they'll hike by themselves, and they'll hike with somebody. And so that's a little bit more of a typical experience, I think. There aren't very many people that hike by themselves solo the whole way, like I've done, but I enjoy it.
And so, when you did it back in 2003, your first time, I mean, you had prepared yourself physically. You had gotten some gear, and maybe not the best gear, but had some gear.
Some of it, yeah.
And and had done some reading, but I guess, is there a little bit of, I mean this in the best way, that some of the naivete that maybe you had in doing this that got you through it, because you maybe didn't know what to expect, or you were prepared well in some ways but maybe not as prepared in other ways?
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair. Like, I'm sure, if I'd known about, certain, like, tick-borne diseases and stuff back then, like, I wouldn't have been so cavalier about never doing a tick check and never wearing bug repellent, like, and never thinking about it, and then, so, like, this time I was, like, super, like, on top of that and checking myself for ticks all the time, and, I didn't even think about that back then because it was just not something I knew to think about, and yeah, so there's certain things like that, obviously, and on the other hand, too, one of the things that I had read, and I think I had read it on the Appalachian Trail Conservancy's site prior to my hike, and it was some sort of thing about, are you prepared to hike for days on end in the pouring rain and have big blisters, and it was just like this list of all these terrible things, and I think I was kind of trying to get people to, like, be a little bit more, I don't know, if it wasn't really necessarily maybe to scare people away, but, like, let them know that they're really getting themselves into something. And I remember reading that, and I'm like 21, and I'm reading this, and I'm just like, actually I was like 20, and I was just like, this sounds like horrible. And so, like, I did a lot of, like, visualization before I set out on the AT of, like, how horrible it was going to be and how much pain I would be in, and I'd be wet and cold and miserable. And so then when I was out there, it was never as bad as, like, what I had imagined, because, like, I had been so scared by this. And so I think that really helped more than anything else, because I, like, had in my head how miserable I was going to be the entire time, and then it was actually not that bad. So I think that might have helped more than the naivete.
Yes. And as you're talking about through hiking, another question came in through Twitter and wanted to know more about the camping part. So I guess you're, as you through hike, as far as, how you took care of and when you're taking care of yourself and setting up camp by yourself, how that went.
Just fine. I think a lot of people have a lot of concern about camping in the woods, and I think it's misplaced. There's not really anything to be concerned with. You're in the wild during the day, and there's nothing really there at night that wasn't there during the day. Some things aren't awake during the day, but that's about it, and for the most part, animals and things like that don't want to have anything to do with you. So yeah, it's a matter of having a good shelter and knowing how to set it up before you get out there. Because I know my first hike on the PCT, we had gotten a new shelter and we hadn't practiced setting it up, and then we tried to set it up for the first time, like, in a rainstorm, and it was kind of a disaster because we didn't really know how to set it up. But yeah, picking a good campsite and camping is fun, and it's not really anything to be concerned with.
Now, I know your trail. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. Your trail name is Anish.
Anish, yeah.
Anish. Tell me how and when you have your trail name. Got you.
So I think it was about 10 days into the PC or the AT in 2003 that I gave myself my trail name. I started May 11th, and so that was a long time after most thru-hikers start northbound. And so there weren't really other hikers around, and usually you get a trail name from other hikers. But I wanted a trail name, and I decided I wanted to call myself Anishinaabe, which is the Native American people group that my great-great-grandmother was a member of. And so I wanted to honor that part of my heritage because I felt like connected to that by living out in the woods and that sort of thing. And all the other hikers just shortened it to Anish because they couldn't pronounce Anishinaabe, and it was a lot to say. So, and then I just kind of went by Anish after that.
And so, I mean, so obviously there's a very deep connection to for you with that name and with being in the woods. So how important was that for you as far as then moving you forward into this new lifestyle when you did the through hike in '03?
Oh, having the trail name?
Maybe the trail name, yeah, and the way in which you picked it for yourself.
Yeah, it was a very meaningful experience, like for me, like emotionally and spiritually, I guess. Like it made me feel connected to like um, something different than what I had grown up with, because I grew up in our typical modern culture, and my summer job the year immediately prior to me going on the AT in 2003 had been at a place called Mackinac Island up in Michigan, and I was a historic interpreter there. So I actually dressed in like 1830s costume and like demonstrated skills like cooking over an open fire and spinning wool and all these things. And that was actually the time period and kind of the general like location where my great great grandmother would have lived. And so I actually ended up learning a lot about like what her culture would have been like and where she would have lived, and how much more difficult it was and how much more close proximity it was to like the land. And so that was kind of when I was out on the AT, it just kind of seemed to click, and I was like, connecting with my cultural past in that way. And so yeah, it was kind of walking away from the lifestyle I knew and embracing something that was different, but yet like only a couple of generations back would have been more typical of like what my ancestors would have been doing, I guess. So yeah, it was kind of an interesting thing for me.
When you finished your first go through of the AT, and in 2003, what were your emotions like? What was that like for you to finish that first one?
It was really emotional for me. It was it was a relief to be done, but yet like I was mostly just sad to be done. Like I wanted to keep hiking, and I had fallen in love with this, and I didn't want to go back to society, and I also had nothing to really go back to. I didn't have a job or a house. I didn't have a partner. I didn't have anything. So there was really no reward to come off that mountain and go home. Like there's a continuation of the Appalachian Trail that goes on up into Canada, and if I'd had money, I probably would have just kept going right over Mount Katahdin and up into Canada. So yeah, it was pretty depressed after I got home, because I was just like, well, now what? Like I walked across the country, and it was the most amazing thing in my life, and everything's going to pale in comparison to that. And while I was on the AT, I actually found out that the Pacific Crest Trail and the Continental Divide Trail exist. Like I didn't know that before I started. And I was just like, you mean there's more trails like this? And so when I got home, I guess that was when I was like, well, I guess I'm just going to plan to go hike those trails. And so I started kind of planning for the PCT. And that was kind of what gave me direction to go forward, something to look forward to. It's another long distance hike.
And so then, what at that point in your life? What are you doing in between?
I worked a lot of just random seasonal jobs. I think my first job when I got back to Michigan was working at a Subway restaurant for like 6 months. And then I got a job working as a park ranger out in Glacier National Park, Montana. And I worked there for a summer season. And then I worked at a ski resort in the winter. And then I went and did the PCT. And then, just bounced around to seasonal jobs that I could do in between hiking seasons, basically.
So did your life basically become working to fund your through hikes?
Yes,
How you,
absolutely. Yeah. So all my money went straight into savings to go hike, the whatever the next trail was. Not much has
And
changed.
'cause no, not much has changed, but you did have to go through a little bit of a shift, right? I read like that in 2012, right? Did you had your marriage, you were married, and that broke up, and yeah, I read the phrase was you quit your job, sold all your furniture, most of your clothes, and went into hiking. I don't know if that's an accurate portrayal of what happened to you, but was there another like a secondary shift that had to come for you after that first euphoric kind of run through the trails?
Yeah, so after I finished the first, or 3 trails the first time, I got married and to my hiking partner, and we attempted to, settle down and have real quote unquote lives. And after about 4 years, I realized I was the most miserable I had ever been in my entire life, and that I just wanted to be out hiking, and that was really all that I ever wanted to do, and that was the only thing that was ever going to make me happy. And so we split up, which was completely amicable, and he's doing his stuff now, and I'm doing my stuff, and we're both really happy, and we're good friends, and so it's not no rancor there, but yeah, I basically I kept working at my job actually for a year because we divorced in 2011, so I kept working at my job, and I was really into ultra running at the time. So 2011 was like my biggest like ultra running year. I ran my first 100 miler and a bunch of other races. And by the time I got to 2012, um, like I was injured from too much racing, and so I kind of was crashing off of that and realizing that I still didn't have what I wanted to do, and realized that it was just because I had been afraid, after all the upheaval of getting divorced and splitting everything up, that I had been afraid to actually go through with the desire to go out on the trails, and that running had just been kind of taking that gap. And so yeah, in 2012, in the summer of 2012, I quit my job, and that's when I sold the rest of everything I owned that I hadn't, already gotten rid of, and bought the one-way bus ticket to Ashland, and walked like 1,000 miles that summer. And I was still injured when I started out, but the injury went away after I walked a few hundred miles. And so yeah, I mean, after I got back from that hike though in the fall and it started snowing and I was no longer on the trail again, I was like, wow, well now what am I going to do? And because now I have nowhere to live and no possessions, and that was, while I was out on the trails when I had really decided I wanted to try to set the speed record on the PCT, and so that was what the winter of 2012 and spring of 2013 were preparing for.
Yeah, and when ultra running kind of was a stopgap for you, kind of in between, and what was it about ultra running that maybe helped you through that period?
Awesome community, lots of great people, lots of good friends, and just the opportunity to get out and log lots and lots and lots of miles on the trails. I mean, and it still, fit with a work schedule and that sort of thing. But it couldn't ever quite replace like being out in the woods for months on end, and that was what it came down to. Is you go out and you run, and then you're home that night and you have a shower and dinner, and I wanted that wild experience where you're just out on your own and sleeping on the ground and maybe not showering for a week and eating only whatever's in your backpack and that sort of thing. So I still love to run trails, but like I don't really race anymore. That was very much a get me through that point in time in my life. Yeah.
And so when you returned to the trails and to through hiking,
Mm-hmm.
had anything was your experience now on the trails any different from the life experiences that you had gone through previously?
Yeah, when I sold everything and bought that bus ticket to Ashland in 2012, I was actually afraid because I was like, what if I don't remember how to through hike? Because I hadn't been out for an extended period of time in like 6 years or something, and so and I started out, and like the first day I was bored, and I was like, I'm really bored out here. I'm so bored. How did I ever like through hike and not be bored and like find this interesting? And then there was all kinds of emotional stuff, baggage that I had to work through from everything that had happened in the last year, and so it was really actually quite miserable and I was in pain because I was injured and like could barely like hike. And so it was actually really miserable for the first like week I was on the trail. And then, I kind of had worked through my emotional issues, and like the injury kind of healed itself, and basically like then all of a sudden I remembered, this is why I like this, and I wasn't bored anymore, and I was fascinated with hiking again, and to my surprise, like I was a stronger hiker than I had been in my early 20s, even though like in my early 20s I felt like I was this invincible, like really strong, hiker, and then I was like, wow, I'm actually stronger even than I was back then. And I'm sure that was from all the running, and like getting my body really used to doing really long mileages, at a faster pace, and also I think just like I hadn't stopped hiking, I just stopped doing long hikes, and so there's that saying about it takes you 10 years or 10,000 hours or something to master something, and so at that point, I mean, I was closing in on having been a hiker for 10 years, and so it was like, oh wow, yeah, I'm really good at this actually, and I'm still really good at this. So that was it was surprising, and it was comforting, and it was a confirmation that I was on the right path, I guess, when I went out there and did that hike, and everything went so well.
When you're out, on the trail for for days at a time or weeks at a time, is it healing for you in an emotional sense? Is that a place of healing for you?
Yeah, definitely. Um, I think that the trail is for you, or the wilderness really, is always going to be for you exactly what you need it to be, even if you're not necessarily aware of what you need it to be when you go out there. Because I mean, when I hit the trail that time, I was very hurt and very angry, and I had a lot of emotional baggage and things like that. And the trail was definitely a place of healing and solace for me. But there's been other times when I've gone out on the trail, and I'm simply there for a challenge, like I want my butt kicked, and the trail delivers that too. And then there's times where I'm just out there to have fun and enjoy myself, and to just like kind of like dance through the flowers and listen to the birds, and it's that when you need that too. And so I think you can usually find whatever you're looking for when you go out, and I mean, like, that's been my experience. So the trail has actually been so many different things to me, just whatever I needed at the time.
And even if you don't know what you need at the time, right?
Right. Exactly.
So when you went back to the AT, after having done it, in '03, what did you hiked it from a different direction,
Hmm.
correct? Like you did a
Right.
different direction. So did that make did that how did that impact the experience for you? And how did coming back? It's almost like did it feel like coming full circle for you to go back to the AT?
Yeah, and that was also a big part of my decision to hike southbound, um, because it was very meaningful on a personal level to basically retrace my steps, walk back in time, to where I started. And I mean, obviously, I started on at the Grand Canyon, but my first through hike was the AT, and that's where I learned so much. And it was one of these places where I had all these like really empowering experiences where I was like, wow, I just did X, Y, or Z, like, and so yeah, starting at Mount Katahdin, which was this place of triumph and yet sadness for me, like the last time, and now it's like this place of like, um, it was a beginning instead of an end, and so walking just back, it seemed very, very meaningful and poignant in some locations where I was like, this is where, you know, you were hypothermic, or this is where, you broke a tooth because you were malnourished, and this is where, you ran into that bear, and this is where, all your toenails fell off, and, like all these like traumatic things, and to walk back and to see that stuff and to see these places with the eyes that had hiked, 17,000 miles in between, and so just experiencing the trail in a completely different way, but yet with this knowledge that, you had been there before, and that I had already had this experience once before, and how it was different. And so that was always on my mind pretty much the entire time I was out there.
Do you still, when you come off the trail off a big hike like that, is there still that moment of depression?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
How do you go about dealing with that?
It's a little different every time. Like after the PCT, I didn't have the depression right away. It actually took it about, I don't know, 6 or 8 months to really hit me. And I think it's because I was so busy with like speaking about my hike and kind of reliving my hike all the time that I never actually got a chance to grieve the hike and to be sad about it and be depressed. And so like for the AT, um, I don't know, like I've been off and on. Like I had some depression for a couple weeks, um, about a week after I got off the trail, and um, but nothing too bad. And I mean, other times I've had really severe depression, like after the first PCT hike and after the first CDT hike, because I didn't know what was next. And I still don't know what's next now, but I have other things to look forward to. And now that I've been through this enough, I realize that, you know, there's always going to be something else to do, and it'll never be the same exact experience, but you can go out. I know I can go out at any time and walk across the country if I really want to. If that's what I need to do, then I will go do it. And that it's not necessarily that I'm losing the opportunity forever, which is how it used to feel. Um, it's like now that I've really cemented this as my lifestyle, that I know that I'll come back to the trail whenever I need it, and so that makes it easier to cope with the depression. I think when I had a harder time when I felt like, well, this is it, I'm never going to do this again, and now I know that that's not necessarily true. So that makes it a little easier.
You use the phrase grieve the hike, and that struck me as sort of very meaningful, because you do have that opportunity, as you know now, that you can go back and you can go back to the trail when you need it. But it's almost like you mourn that you had that experience, and that one experience is gone, and you have to acknowledge that you feel sad that it's over.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because I mean the trail doesn't change, but the people change, the experience changes. Even if I were to go back and hike the AT again the exact same way I did this year, it'd be different because I'd have different weather and there'd be different people and I'd be a different person. So that experience that you had is gone. Like it's done. When it's done, it's done. And so it is sad, to walk away from that. I mean, it's like coming home from like an awesome vacation and being like, oh well, I'll never go back to like wherever the place is. I'll never go be there again. And you're a little sad about that. It's why we take pictures so much, so we can remember it. But it's there's something about this journey and being out in the woods for months on end that it kind of gives you this reverse culture shock, because you come back to like the busyness and the lights and the sound and everything, and you miss the simplicity of like just walking and not having anybody care about what you're doing, except you wake up in the morning, you walk as far as you feel like you want to walk, and then you go to sleep wherever you want, and like you eat what's in your backpack, and life is extremely simple. And so there's certain aspects, like your whole outlook on life and your whole way of doing things has changed, and then you have to like come away from that and go back to the way things used to be. And so there's some reverse culture shock going on. There's sadness because your experience is over. There's also relief that you're not walking anymore, and so sometimes there can be some guilt that you feel guilty that you don't miss walking every day, and you're glad to be sleeping indoors when it's cold and raining. So there's a lot of complex mixed emotions that can occur after a hike like that.
We have a question that came in from Twitter that wants to know, when's the best time to start the AT, and the same question for the PCT.
It depends on which year you're hiking in, what the weather is, and whether you're going north or south. They both have different weather windows and different typical starting dates based on factors like how much snow the Sierras got, how much snow Washington got, and your speed, how fast you're going to hike. So mostly people start hiking northbound in the spring, and people who start hiking southbound mostly start at the beginning of summer.
Are there, you mentioned the culture shock coming, kind of off that trail, and I just want to ask you, I guess, can you give us an example of maybe an experience or a lesson or something that you have learned on the trail that you then transitioned into our everyday, civilized life?
Definitely the idea of simplicity. I don't own very much stuff. I own backpacking gear, and that's about it. because I realized that, if I can survive for months on end living outside with just what I can carry on my back, then I really probably don't need that much stuff, especially in, indoor society where I have my shelter already, there. Um, so, I tend to like not hang on to things, and also just try to not like take that simplicity into my idea of work. Like I work to have experiences. So I work and I use that money to go out and hike or to have some sort of trip or to have these experiences that make my life worth living. I don't want to spend my life, working in hopes that someday when I'm old I'll be able to like take the money that I have saved up over decades and then go do something. So I like to just keep living in the moment, which is pretty much all you can do when you're on a through hike. You can't think about the end that's 2,000 some odd miles away that you're walking toward. You're only walking toward wherever you're sleeping that night or the next town or whatever. You have these very in the moment goals.
And so you mentioned you don't necessarily really know what's next for you, but what are you doing right now? And is there anything on the horizon coming up for you?
Right now, I'm just running and hiking for the winter here in Washington, and just kind of enjoying a little bit of a downtime. I'm planning to do some traveling this winter, hopefully internationally, to do some hiking, and we'll see what next summer brings. I don't know. Probably I'm in the midst of working on the climbing the highest 100 peaks in the state of Washington, and I've done like 52 of them, so I'll be trying to do a good chunk next year as well. Next summer. Climbing season typically starts in like April or May, depending on what peaks you're climbing. So hopefully I'll be out climbing a bunch of mountains next summer, and we'll see what else comes down the line.
Is there anything that has surprised you? I know you've done some interviews and done some speaking after you've come off the AT. Is there anything that's surprised you about people's reactions to your record or to your accomplishment or to anything at all?
Um, I guess it just continues to surprise me how many people actually care. Like, when I started out doing this, I didn't really think anybody would even notice or really care, except for like my parents. And so it's been kind of a little bit overwhelming at times, just how much media and stuff there is, and it's kind of surreal when you're online and like on Facebook or something, and you see like somebody has made a meme with your quote on it, and you don't even know the person, and you're just like, that's bizarre. Like, so there's kind of some surreal moments like that. But what's refreshing is the fact that, when I'm around most of my hiking friends and things like that, like it's just me. Like they knew me before I set records, so like it's still kind of like nice. Like they think it's really cool, but they know that I'm still just me, and so that's nice. But yeah, so it is kind of surprising how many people really pay attention to this sort of thing.
We have another question that came in from Twitter that said, did you have to do any mental preparation for being alone?
Um, I didn't. Maybe I could have done some, but I didn't do any. I guess maybe just because I've thru hiked alone before, and I don't mind being alone. I have two older sisters, but they're 20 years older than I am, so they were out of the house before I came along, really. So I don't know. I've always been kind of on my own, so it doesn't really bother me.
And yet that first experience, you were too busy worst case scenarioing everything, right? So
Right,
you
yeah, exactly.
about being alone. You
Yeah.
mentioned people doing quote memes with your quotes, and I read a quote of yours that I loved. It was, "Every girl has a fairy tale. This just happens to be mine."
Mm.
Is that? I mean, what does that mean for you? What do you mean by that? This is your fairy tale.
Well, so that came from a TEDx talk I did last spring down in Napa Valley, and their whole theme for the conference was redefining success. And so when I was thinking about how to, coming up with my talk, basically, I decided to frame it in the theme of fairy tales. And so that was kind of just the way, the choice of words comes from me trying to frame this redefining success talk in the language of fairy tales. And so I talked about how, I was raised on, the traditional fairy tales of, the princess and the prince that rescues her and all of this sort of thing. And then how as I grew up, I decided that, you know, wasn't the princess in need of rescuing. I was the princess that was going out and having an adventure, and regardless of whether there was a prince at the end or not, I was going to go have my adventure. And so yeah, the my fairy tale is me going out and living my life, in pursuit of my dreams, versus like what I thought was the fairy tale of finding the right man and settling down and living happily ever after.
Because well, and you tried that, and it didn't feel right for you. That didn't that wasn't the right fit for you.
Right, yeah, that wasn't my fairy tale. My fairy tale is me being dirty and stinky and hiking all day and eating lots of chocolate and sleeping on the ground. That's my fairy tale, and it's not for everyone, but that's mine.
One as we'll wrap up on this episode, and it's been so wonderful talking with you. One of the things that we like to just ask people to some final thoughts for people watching. What would be your words of wisdom or words of inspiration for maybe someone who has listened to you and is intrigued by either the idea of hiking or through hiking? What would be your advice for them?
My advice is always to dream big and to be courageous. I dreamt big. Like I was like, hiking seems pretty cool. I think I'll through hike. And being courageous enough to go is really the key. We can have all the dreams we want, but if without the courage to actually make them a reality, they're just dreams. And you can spend your whole life saying, "Oh, someday," or "I wish." But at some point, if you really want to make it happen, you have to just make it happen. You have to take risks. I've taken a lot of risks, to be where I'm at, and that it's been right for me. It may not be right for everybody, but life never really gives you, 6 months off to go hiking in the woods or money for it or whatever. It doesn't just say, "Oh, here you go play." You have to take some risks and go make it happen.
Well, Heather Anderson, Anish, if we meet you on the trail, we'll call you that. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story and sharing your journey. And thank everyone for watching. Stay tuned for our next episode of Women's Empower Active. Be sure you're following UR Sportswear for all of the details on that. I'm Amy Moritz, and thank you very much. We'll see you next time.